Hello and welcome back. This is our first official non-recap video of the year outside of the preview. In this video, I would like to discuss the current USTF CCCA rankings, the collegiate rankings, similar to how college basketball has the AP or the coaches poll. This is what that is for college track and field. And I've waited to this point because I wanted there to be at least enough data for us to judge where the teams are. I think having the rankings come out in January sets uh, a lot of discussion up for failure simply because majority of the teams are not even running with even 50% of their roster. Sometimes it's less than that. There are a few where they're running with 60 or 70%, but for the most part they are not. And so, without further ado, I want to discuss the top five rankings on the women's side and the men's side. And we'll get started on the women's side first, and we'll give a full breakdown and argument for each team in their space and whether or not I agree with that ranking. So, on the women's side, we'll get started with the number one team, which is the University of Illinois. University of Illinois earned that ranking justifiably. Illinois has 12 top 10 rankings in five different events. That signaling they have a lot of depth in a lot of different areas. And they also have, some heavy hitting talent right up front. So, what proves that they have depth is their event squad rankings. So, how much do they have in an event where they're strong in? They're ranked number one in four different events. They have the most talent and depth in the high jump, long jump, weight throw, and pentathlon. No other team I'm going to talk about today will have that many number ones. For them to have four and then to be deep in four events, that's saying something. They also, again, as I said, are a strong team in really five different events. And this is the work of Petros Kiprianou, the coach at University of Illinois, who won a national title at Georgia, relying heavily on the field events, having a decent sprint squad, being able to score distance here or there, but he has noticeably relied heavily on the field events, but especially in the jumps area and in the multi events. Having the number one high jump group, long jump group, weight throw, and pentathlon, meaning you have depth in four events where you are the strongest in the country and you are capable of scoring a ton of points heavily. And I'm gonna shock you. I even though they're ranked number one, I'm not quite sure they're number one team because I don't have them number one on my list, but I do have them listed as number two. The next team we talk about is the team that I do have ranked number one, and that is Georgia. Under Coach Carol Smith Gilbert, who I've mentioned many times today, is having, sort of a renaissance. I don't know if I'm going to use that word, but certainly a demonstration of her ability to coach, recruit, and develop. Every stop that she's had, she's been a star. When she was an assistant at Penn State, when she went from Penn State to the University of Tennessee as an assistant, when she became the full-time head coach at Central Florida, and then she went to USC, and now back at on the East Coast at University of Georgia. And she went to Georgia after having won two national titles at USC. So she was a winning coach somewhere else, and she's already starting that process here at Georgia. Georgia has 10 top 10 rankings in seven different events, and this is why this is my number one team. They are the number one team in the 60-meter dash, the 60-meter hurdles, and the 400-meter dash. So the number two ranked group in the 200, the number three ranked group in the triple jump, and number five ranked group in the long jump. And in order to even be a mention in the event squad, you have to rely on four athletes minimum. So in order for you to be strong, you have to have depth in that event. And the fact that they have it in so many events, and yes, they're in the toughest conference, which is the SEC, but Georgia has already proven whether it's the SEC or Nationals, they are capable of showing up and showing out. And I actually think that's going to continue. I actually expect for them to improve upon most of their performances. Their athletes have consistently gotten better from where they start at the beginning of the season, specifically during postseason. They are really strong performers at postseason. I highlight Kayla Jackson, who snuck into the championships last year after missing a lot of the indoor season due to injury, and she showed out at not only the SEC meet but the national meet as well. That's just been their signature, and I don't think that's going to change. They have a very well-rounded team, and we're also pointing out the fact that these event squad groups are not including their depth in a relay, or excuse me, not necessarily depth, but their ability to score in a relay. Georgia has the number one 4x4 in the country, and they have the most depth to me in the 400, even though they're not, you know, solely relying on that group. They have great 60-meter runners and 60-meter hurlers. Their 400-meter depth is incredible because it goes beyond their top four. It's literally their top eight. They technically have 12 really strong ones because they have three different groups ranked in the top 15 in the 4x4 in the country. Excuse me, I scratched. They're not the number one 4x4, they're number two. They were until Arkansas just dethroned them, but they've already beaten the top Arkansas squad already in the season, and I think that's going to be what happens again at the SEC meet, which I think is going to be an incredible meet. But that's my number one team in the country, and they're currently ranked number two. Our third team is BYU. BYU is probably the number one distance program for women in the country, with our number five squad being a second. But BYU is incredibly strong. Eight top 10 rankings in four different events, and they're all distance events. They're number four in the 800, number one in the mile, number one in the 3K, and number one in the 5K. So they have insane depth in three different distance events, on top of having the number one DMR in the country. So this is a very formidable group. They generally do heavily rely on their distance runners, but they have decent sprinters. And I think they're trying to round out a more well-rounded program, but they're so strong in the distance events, it's hard for them to go away and to be ignored as not a national title threat because they legitimately are. They are the number three team in the country for a reason. I'm curious to see if they can improve upon their ability to coach 800 because I was actually shocked to see them only at number four because I'm like, well, maybe they should just have some of their 3K and milers just step down just for a weekend, just to prove a point. Because I think that the coaching there is so strong, and they've proven that over the past 7 or 8 years, just how great their coaching and development is. Moving on to the number 14, we'll look at South Carolina, and I am a high school graduate in the class of 2004, and I graduated from college from Eastern Michigan in 2008. So that, just to give you that background, my entire high school life and college life, South Carolina, specifically on the women's side, was always a national title threat under Coach Curtis Fry. And Coach Tim has kind of done the same thing, brought them back to this national title relevance. Because when I was in college, I knew of the likes of Natasha Hastings, Shalonda Solomon, Renetta Smith. I mean, they just had an insane group of sprinters and hurdlers. They were also pretty good in the field events, and they were actually decent in the 800 as well. He's kind of taken that to another level. South Carolina has seven top 10 rankings in seven different events. And I would actually personally want to move them ahead of BYU, but I can't ignore BYU's depth in three different events where they're ranked number one. South Carolina is number three in the 60-meter dash, number four in the 60-meter hurdles, and number three in the 200-meter dash. And I'm not even sure if they've really shown their hand yet. I think this is a really deep group that has only scratched the surface, and it just feels part of me feels that they're coming along gingerly. They're going to let everything sort of explode at the SEC meet, which is what I'm expecting, which is the reason why I sort of think that meet is going to be incredible, because I feel that a number of SEC programs, while ranked highly, are kind of hiding some of their better athletes or have put them in meets where they're not really been, I don't want to say pushed to their potential, but where they've had to strain themselves to get a top mark. They're getting these marks just based off showing up, doing what they need to do that day, and going away. We know that they're going to be a strong group in the 200. Jamesia Ford, who we've not heard a lot of this season, she's ranked, in the top three in the 200. I don't think she's trying to have the same type of season she had last year. I think she's coming along slowly because what happened at the end of last year, she really punished that hamstring. And I think that perhaps the coaching staff took some lessons from that and said, let's not overload her and make her do all the work. And they went out and recruited and got some transfers, and it's really clear that this is becoming a very well-rounded program. Now, moving to our number five team on the women's side, that's the number two distance program, in my opinion. That is Oregon. And Oregon looks a lot different than when they were winning all those national titles a few years ago. They were a more well rounded program, and they had great sprinters and hurdlers to go along with that, and great jumpers. It feels as if they're moving back to the Oregon of old, where they're relying more heavily on the distance events. And although they do have some pretty good throwers, they don't necessarily have the depth in it, and they do have a really good hurdler and Aaliyah McCormick. It's just they don't have the same depth that they used to. But this is still a really good squad. Six top 10 rankings in five different events, and their number two group in the mile, and then the number two group in the 3K, which we know the number one group is BYU. So they're going to be heavily relying on their distance group, 4 points, and Aaliyah McCormick in the hurdles. I do think this is still a good team. Ranked number five, I'm going to shock you guys and say I think because of how great they've been in the mile, that's all we've kind of leaned on. But we can't ignore the greatness of BYU, which is going to be there to challenge them. And outside of the mile and the 3K and the 60 hurdles, where else are they going to be able to score a bunch of points? So they're going to have a strong DMR, but they're not going to be able to score in the 60, the 2, the 4. Um, we're waiting to see if they're going to increase their depth in the 800. What about the 5K? What about any jumping events? Where they're in the throws? We're still waiting for more of the squad to get up to where those two groups are, the mile group and the 3K group. Still a great squad, but I'm not necessarily sure I would have them at number five. Now, moving on, we'll go to the men's side. And this is where things got a little interesting for me because I actually really didn't disagree with the first two schools, but the last three, to me, the resumes, although good, not necessarily as strong as rankings one and two. So the number one ranked squad on the men's side is Arkansas, and I would say that's very justifiable. I do not see any team really being able to compete with them come championship season. Until I see something different at the SEC meet, I really think it's going to be hard for anyone to really knock them down. I think our number two squad is going to show us if they can in a couple weeks. But I think Arkansas is just really loaded. 12 top 10 rankings in eight different events. That's the best group all day. They're number three in the 60, number one in the 60-meter hurdles, number one in the 200-meter dash, number five in the 400, number three in the 800, and number four in the 3K. They're covering the sprints, hurdles, and distance events. And this isn't the John McDonald Arkansas squad where they were able to cover every single distance event along with having great jumpers. Because that's something that's missing, I think, at Arkansas right now is they don't have the great long jumper and triple jumpers that they've always had. Each coaching staff, well, I don't even want to say each coaching staff, but each sort of evolution of Arkansas men's track and field has always included a great triple jump group or great long jump group or a combination of both. And they seem to not be, seem to be lacking that area. Of course, the coach left and went to Kansas State. And I can't ignore that that's not worked out for Kansas State very well because we're going to talk about them in a few. But I think that's the one area that I miss about the Arkansas squad. But they're so deep in the sprints. Um, Jamarian Stubbs, the transfer from Alabama State, I think was clearly a smart decision. But they are so loaded in 200. Actually, all of their top four guys would actually qualify. If the meet ended to, if the qualifications ended today, they would qualify all four. And that's incredible. They're deep in the 60 hurdles, and I think Jerome Campbell leads that group. I think he and perhaps Mr. Andrews of Texas Tech, maybe Malachi Snow if he can get the technique to match his speed. are the only ones capable of defeating Jacoby Tharp. Jacoby Tharp is actually the most technically gifted hurler in the country. He has the technique that the others do not. They have the speed, but as I said a couple of weeks ago, and I even replied to someone's comment, I don't think anyone is going to dethrone Jacoby. But if there's anyone that can do it, it's possibly Jerome Campbell at Arkansas. What a deep group. And the fact that they have still a great distance core, even though they lost, a key athlete to the University of Washington, Ruben Reyna. What a great group still, which is telling you they're going to have a strong DMR. They may have the best DMR come after, DMR weekend, which is coming up, but no one's taken them. I don't see it. I just don't see it. Number two ranked team is Tennessee. Hats off to Coach Dwayne Ross there. He's doing a wonderful job. Nine top 10 rankings in 7 events. That is still pretty impressive. It's not 12 of Arkansas, but having 9 is still strong. Number one in the 60-meter dash and number one in the pole vault. I still think there's more room for them to develop their 200-meter game. They just haven't put, I think, a strong group of 4 together yet, but they have a great, strong group of 3. So I think that's coming. They also have a decent 400-meter group that's developing. That they have just recently broke the school record in the 4x4. Sprints wise, they're pretty much there. We're seeing them grow in their field events, and that's where they're strongest. Although they don't have, that many strong event squads, is because they're spreading their talent through a multitude of events. They have a great group of throwers as well. Like, you just can't not ignore it. They're, to me, the only real threat to Arkansas because of their ability to score in the throwing events and Arkansas's lack of that. If Arkansas had, I think, the jumpers to combat what Tennessee has in the throwers, then we are looking at just surefire, not even really a competition. But I think Tennessee is going to make things interesting when we have the SEC championship. We'll be able to better predict, okay, maybe this ranking of number one of Arkansas running away with it isn't as strong as we think. Now, the number 3 team in the country is Oregon. And just like on the women's side, the men are kind of moving away from having a decent sprint group. It's been a minute since we've seen them have a legit threat in the sprints, but they are strong in the distance events. They have 7 top 10 rankings in 4 different events. They're number 2 overall in the 800, number 4 overall in the mile, and number 1 in the 3K in regards to event squad. So we know that they're deep in distance. They're probably our favorite between them, Arkansas, and BYU for the DMR title. So we know they have a strong relay to support their distance events. Um, they are so strong in the 800. It's surprising that they're not number one when we talk about our next squad. We know why, because of how dominant they've been in the 800. But we can't ignore how great Oregon has been in the 800 and in the mile. I'm curious to see what they do at the Big Ten championships because they're going to need to sort of score in bunches because a lot of the Big Ten teams slowly but surely are kind of closing that gap between Oregon and Washington in regards to middle distance. I say specifically Michigan and Penn State. They're going to be a threat to both Oregon and Washington, specifically in the 800 the mile. So I don't think Oregon and Washington are going to be able to heavily rely on that at Big Ten title time. Now, moving on to the number 4 team, we did mention the coach who left Arkansas. It was the field event, primarily the long jump and triple jump coach. And he has gone on to Kansas State, which is our number 4 ranked team. And I don't even ever remember mentioning at any point as an independent journalist or as a journalist who wrote for the Eastern Echo, my old alma mater newspaper, Kansas State being a top 5 ranked program. So clearly things were right when he was hired away from Arkansas. They have 8 top 10 rankings in 4 different events. They are heavily reliant on the field, but they do have a decent group developing among their runners and their throwers. They have the number three high jump squad in the country, the number one long jump, and the number one triple jump. So no, it is not Oklahoma. It is actually Kansas State. And that shouldn't surprise you because he did this very same thing when he was at Arkansas. So here we are again, the same script, just different cast. And the coaching is just superb, just consistent quality development at a depth. And they're ranked number four, but I'm going to say I think this is a little too high, even though they have a deep group within that. To me, you need to be able to score in a number of different places. So the way I feel about Oregon, I feel similar to Kansas State. I think they're both a little higher than I would like. Now, moving on to the number five team, that's Penn State. And that's the 800 school that's been challenging Oregon for supremacy. We've seen it. They have, I believe, two or three in the 800 that are under sub 145. If had it not been for Colin Salmon at Northern Arizona, Handel Roban would have the NCAA record in the 800. In fact, he's 300ths of a second away from tying Handel, not Handel, but Colin Salmon. So they're the number one squad in the 800 and then the number two squad in the shot put. They have six top 10 rankings in five different events. This is a pretty strong squad. I think this was the strongest Penn State's squad I've seen on the men's side in forever. They also have a great young sprinter in Johnny Dwyer, and he has a couple of teammates that can hang. I think this team is actually better built for the outdoors, believe it or not. I think they're a legit threat come outdoors. I think their ranking will be much higher. To me, I would actually move them up. I think they're between three and four. I do think this Penn State team is better than Oregon, and I think they're better than Penn State. They can score in areas where those two schools cannot, and they can score similarly in the same area. I think it's only a matter of time before we see one of their 800 runners step up to the mile just for points and him putting up a wild performance. They're gonna have a decent 4x4. They're gonna have a decent DMR. Um, this team I think is a legit threat, and I think a lot of what they've done this season has kind of gone unnoticed. But I haven't ignored them. I see everything Penn State is doing. This is a very, very strong squad, and I think they're also a big threat to winning the Big Ten title. I think this Big Ten championship is really sort of a six-team race. I think it's going to be between Penn State, Oregon, USC. I don't want to put Washington in there. I think Washington's going to do well in the distance, but I don't think they're going to do well in any other area. So I'm putting Michigan there, and I am putting. Let me go back. Penn State, USC, Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State. Oh, and I want to include Iowa. Those are the six teams I think that are legit threats to win the Big Ten title. Conference championship season is going to be insane. Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, three very strong conferences where the conference champion is going to pretty much make some uh, headway going into the NCAA title because we're going to have a better idea of what their teams are capable of in a championship like setting. Well, all right, and that is this video. I'm really happy to do sort of a great breakdown of the rankings. We'll probably have more to talk about. This is DMR weekend coming up, so we'll see what happens. And the following weekend, we get right into conference championships. So look for a potential preview. I may preview just the major conferences. We'll see, because that is a monumental task for a working person, but we'll see. So please like, share, subscribe, comment as you are aware. I really appreciate your feedback and support, and I do converse. So please comment. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you in our next weekend recap this Sunday or Monday, whenever you choose to watch the video.